Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Creative Assembly live stream. I'm Luke, and I'm the lead recruitment resourcer here at Creative Assembly. I'm hosting the live Q&A, but more importantly, joining me today are Joy. Joy, do you want to tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself?
I am Joy. I've been with Creative Assembly for about 5 years. I work as a senior designer, and it is my job to work with other people and create features for our game. I will drive this process from an idea to implementation and make sure we get it made in the time frame we have.
Cool. And also is Leif. Leif, could you also introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, like Luke said, my name's Leif. I'm a project design director, CA. That means my main responsibility is of the coordination and the organization of the design team's work, make sure that the planning goes smoothly and then the execution of it goes smoothly as well. So in short, talking a lot to people. And before that, I used to be a senior designer on Three Kingdoms. Yeah, and I've been at CA for pretty much 4 years now.
Cool. So we're going to spend the next hour discussing key considerations in game design, about the design process at CA, and about discovering the right feature for the right game. We'll break this down into process and components and discuss the foundations for which good design is built upon. We'll also be taking your questions throughout this, so feel free to start sending in questions as soon as you want to, and we'll make sure we try and get around to as many of them as we possible. Yeah, to start off with, we'll go into tell you a little bit more about the two experts. So Joy, can you tell us a little bit more about your role and what does a day sort of look like?
So at the moment, I am in charge of a certain feature. I mainly talk to a lot of other people in the company from different disciplines to create this feature. So that includes a lot of meetings and walking over to people's desks. But as we're working from home right now, it's a lot of messaging instead.
A lot of teams, yeah.
A lot of teams, yeah. But yeah, that's basically my day. Lots of chatting.
And for you at the moment, Leif?
I basically had to get these pods for my ears because I couldn't wear the real headphones anymore. They're so heavy on my ears. No, like for Joy, talking to people is really important for a designer, and certainly for me, it's there's a lot of chats involved with the various designers on the team, but also with other disciplines. So usually, if you want to break it down between planning a feature and then implementing a feature. The planning phase, it's a lot of sort of coordination between different stakeholders, like understanding requirements from other departments, understanding requirements for the pipeline, like how things are being authored in the game. And then in the execution, it's more about talking to the designers who are working on the features, guiding them through the process. There was a good statement once made by my boss, who said that if you are more in a lead designer role, you're becoming you're not adding an absolute value to the project, you have to add a multiplier. So I'm not adding plus 100 gold, I'm adding plus 10%, so I need to make sure that everyone on the project is basically as efficient and as good as possible.
So I think what's useful for hopefully everyone in the live stream as well, we'll talk to you a little bit about sort of how we go about taking features forward and how they come about, etc. And also sort of go through some of the skills involved with you for what we think designers need to be able to make sure that this works. They get in the game first of all, and also they're useful for what we're doing. So Joy, from your perspective, how does a feature start, and what's the process for you to go about to getting that into the design pipeline?
So it can start with an idea. The idea can come from anywhere, and then it's a very collaborative process. You have to talk to the other designers. You have to make sure that it fits with the rest of the game, and basically be able to communicate this to everybody else so they know exactly what it is you want to get in. As well.
It's definitely it's already getting to one of the most contentious topics, I guess, with like how valuable is an idea? Because like Joy said, like it's a very collaborative process, and as a designer, it's not about coming up with the greatest ideas, because anyone, like, great ideas can come from anywhere. And it's more about championing whatever idea is agreed upon as the best for the game, and then you champion that, and as Joy said earlier, like making sure that it is implemented in the right way. That is super crucial.
Yeah. In terms of obviously sort of, you'll have features that will obviously vary in size and manpower and length of sort of, development. So how do you go about mapping out how long you think that would take? Who do you involve in that discussion, and how does that come about?
Well, that's basically the art of estimation is, and every designer or every developer has, like, after a while when you work with people, you already know, like, okay, this one is already underestimating or overestimating, and a lot of the personality comes through. I'm not like, Joy, are you an underestimator or an overestimator?
I'm an underestimator.
Me too.
So I usually give the time it takes to do the task, and then I don't consider the testing and the problems that you will encounter during the testing. So what I try to do now is I give the time that I think it's going to take me to implement it, and then I double it.
Okay. And does that involve sort of discussions with programming, with art, to talk through the complexities of what you're thinking of doing?
Yes, so those talks will happen before I give my time estimate.
Okay.
But it's also already, like, to be a bit more serious now, maybe. It also a bit comes down to actually some hard skills for a designer.
Yeah.
Basically, because a lot of it is down to breaking it down into parts. Like if I'm supposed to design, I don't know, an economy for a Total War game, then a lot of it is understanding the problem space and breaking it down into the smallest parts that you can break it down into. And that will make it much easier to give informed estimates, because small things are usually easier to estimate than big things. So on production side, for example, we do similar multipliers as for Joy. Basically, the bigger a task is, you add even more to it, basically, just for safety measure.
Certainly. And then in terms of sort of when you're coming up with these features, then what is the sort of the most important factors for that to be a good game design or a good design of a feature? What are the important factors that need to be considered for you guys, but also what are the skills that you think come in hand with that designer to make sure that they're followed through? That's a very complex question. So, okay, I'll start. I can start easy if you want, Leif, which is in terms of sort of a feature. Then, what's the important factors for you for a game designer, for their skills to have armed that they're going to need to take forward in that?
That's an interesting angle that you spun there already, with being able to do a certain feature.
Yes,
it's also part of the considerations, like, do we have the tech to do it? Do we have the knowledge to do it? But that's a few steps down the line, maybe. But first of all, I think, and then again, swinging back to the idea, how important it is. Like, there are a lot of really strong designs you can come up with, strong mechanics that would be really fun. But the design in the end always needs to be measured in the context of the game. Like, what does it do to the overall game experience? And you might have a really cool feature. And it was certainly also for me, like, I remember one of the first lessons I had basically joining as a designer was to understand that, this would be really, really cool, but in the context of the game, it's actually distracting from what we want to achieve. And that, I think, that ties into one of the most important design skills the designer needs to have, I think, is the ability to zoom out and zoom back in as well. Like, zoom out of the little design you're doing right now and see the context of the overall game, and then constantly have that shift of perspective almost, where you understand the different levels of what it does to the game.
So from your perspective, Joy, to help with that, does play testing, does iterations, are they key for that process? Are they fundamental to what you're doing there?
Oh, definitely. So I just wanted to add on that it's very important to be like logical, make sure all the systems and everything makes sense and it works with the overall game. You have to be able to analyze it and also be able to take criticism. So listen to your team, which I think is very important. But yes, with once you have an idea and it's in the game, you've tested it, and once you've tested it, and you can basically feel if it's right for the game or not, and if it's not, then you'll have to make another iteration and be like, okay, how could we improve this? So maybe we add this. Okay, let's add this, and now we test it again. Does this feel okay? And
So
continue.
in terms of from your own personal perception, then, is there a certain number of iterations or certain number of attempts you're going to do for that, whether you will start to then question yourself as a designer, whether this is actually the direction you need to head in? Who do you get to realign you with that, and who do you sort of bounce that off?
I think that's what the team is there for. So when you're testing it, you're not testing it just by yourself. You will have the team there. The team will test it as well. You could even sit in a room and test it together. And that way you'll get more ideas in there on how you can improve it, or more, opinions about, okay, yeah, this works. And if there's several of us that thinks it works, then it might work.
So do you think it helps life then if you are less personal about whether it's your idea, someone else's idea? Is that fundamental for you for a good designer, that they don't have that investment in those?
I think it's an interesting balance, because I think if you're like Joy just mentioned that having that level of detachment is really important, like not to be too precious about your designs. On the other hand, I also feel like if you need a bit of heart. You need to put your heart into the design, right? So I think a good balance is that you basically have a strong idea of how it should work, and you went through the due process, and you can basically prove that it could work. But then you are basically flexible enough to see that you've been wrong, and that's always one of our designers. He's always very and sometimes we have like loud arguments across the hall basically with each other, but then we go away and like, okay, yeah, I understood, like, okay, that's and that flexibility is really important, but that's that comes with a lot with experience, I think. And everyone can ask themselves, like, how do you stay detached from something you care a lot about? It's not very easy, right? So it's there's a lot of experience that comes in there, I think.
Yeah, certainly. And in terms of that from you then, Joy, how do you sort of, when it's, when you're pulling that through and when you're doing these iterations, etc., do you have a certain feedback loop that you've sort of come accustomed to that helps you in that process?
I take on everyone's feedback. If they test my feature and they have opinions and suggestions, then I will take that on board. And then a group of us will go through it together and be like, and then we can go through each point together to see if it makes sense. Should we try this? Do we have time to try this? Okay, then we can do that.
It's definitely like a sort of also the viewpoint of different disciplines is very valuable, and that's where like QA, for example, is absolutely super valuable for that process overall, because they usually don't have that personal attachment to I've sat here and designed my feature. Like they just want to see the best quality game, so they can give a really good view on things that you yourself might not always have.
Certainly.
It's very important to me that we have QA involved in this whole process.
Certainly. And then in terms of sort of as a designer then, because obviously, communities are getting more involved in feedback now, and their sort of, and their feedback is taken, very seriously. So how does it feel for you as a designer when the community gives feedback to an idea, to a feature you've had?
Sure. And it's I think it's actually probably a very, very good lesson to become less attached, because you do realize, even like fans that you can normally really associate with, because we all love Total War, have a different angle on things, and they might not like a feature that you did, and then ideally you sort of appreciate this viewpoint, and then after a bunch of feedback, you come to understand that what is good, what is good, what is bad, and it can only really be reflected by the context of the overall game.
Yeah.
So it's a good lesson, I think, in terms of designing.
So from as a junior, as a trainee, when you were learning the trade yourself, how would you go about getting that feedback? Did you get that feedback when you were studying, when you wanted to be a designer? Who did you go to get that from?
So if I was studying, it would be from the lecturer, I guess.
Okay.
But what I think is important to be able to learn and to grow is to always ask questions. If you're doubting anything, just ask questions. There will always be someone there to guide you or to help you, give their opinion, share their experience, and definitely ask questions.
That's a very good point, actually. I think that out of anything, like when we interview like aspiring trainees or junior designers, like if someone doesn't know everything, doesn't matter. Like, of course, but asking the right questions and being like willing to really learn and understand all these viewpoints that we talked about, that is like a super valuable skill. So yeah, I think Joel, it's a very good point to always keep asking questions, basically.
Do you think that's a way people can almost seem more, less of an interest to you if they try to come across as though they know everything themselves? To you, that doesn't necessarily show their flexibility or their desire to want to learn because of their wants to sort of express what they know.
Yeah, and I think that's. Yeah, sorry, Joel.
I was just gonna say, I think it's harder to get to know that person if they don't ask questions, because then I just have to assume things, and I might assume wrong. So it's easier if we have that, open dialogue, like always have this, open communication, especially within the team.
Certainly. And for you, Leif? Hello, Leif, can you hear me?
I'm experiencing technical difficulties. My team is. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
I'm guessing you can't hear us, so I'll carry on with Joy if that's okay. If you can hear me, Leif, and we'll come back to you obviously when we can. So, Joy, in terms of since you've been at CA, what's the most unconventional way a feature's come about from your experience?
Unconventional way. I feel like there are no unconventional ways, because the ideas and features can come from anywhere, you just try it. If it makes sense, you keep it.
Cool. In terms of sort of from yourself then, obviously as a designer, you're going to be spending a lot of time polishing a feature, doing many iterations to try and get it exactly where you write, the way you want it to be, and everything else. Is there sort of an amount of time that you will always dedicate to that? Does it vary? And how do you what are the pitfalls to making sure it goes correctly? What that you've learned over the years?
I don't think there's a time frame on this. I think. Sorry, my son just came by. What's been really important for us is to use an external UX testing.
Okay.
So that means we get people in from the outside to test it, and because they will have no attachment to the game at all. And we're not there when they're testing it either. So they will be very honest about the features. And
is that honesty really important from you as a designer then, in terms of?
Oh yes, definitely. I think within the team we can all be a bit biased, because we want to make the best possible game, right? Yeah. So these opinions of people outside the team are very valuable.
Do you think it helps if you are a fan of the game already then, or do you think sometimes that can also be a hindrance at the same time?
I think both, because if you're a fan, you want to make it the best possible, right? And no, he tried to dab, but yeah. What was the question?
That's okay. I was just saying, do you think that when you're a fan of it, can it come with helps and hindrances, I guess, in terms of
Oh yeah,
the design?
Because you want to make it the best possible. You have passion for the project and the game itself. So you might be looking at stuff a bit critically. But at the same time, you have the bias. It is your little baby, so you might be a bit sensitive.
From a personal perspective, is it quite difficult to let go of a design that you've helped see through to a certain point? Can that be quite a difficult decision for you personally to be able to make or to be part of?
For me personally, I don't feel like it's that difficult, because we are several people going through the process together. What we usually do is playing through the game together in a meeting room, just a few of us from different disciplines. And we all just throw comments in here and there just to try and make it better. So if someone is commenting on something that I've made, for example, it's because they want to make it better. So there are no hard feelings.
Yeah. But I think I'm guessing when you so we'll go into some of the questions actually that I think are really interesting, because you're here as well, and while we try and get life back hopefully. But in terms of yourself then, how did you start out in the industry, and I suppose along with that, how difficult did you find that initial first step into the industry as well?
So for me, I did a computer science degree. So I was doing programming for 3 years, found some design courses and thought, oh, I want to do design. So I stayed another year in university to do that. What they don't teach you in university is how to write CVs and how to go through the interview process. So that did not go well for me. I don't know if they do that now, but I think that's a really important skill to learn, especially when it's your first job. You need to know how to, sell yourself, basically.
Cool. And Leif, are you back?
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Apologies. Sorry. Of course, it had to happen.
That's absolutely fine. Cool. So interesting point. So, Leif, I don't know if you heard where we were at. So we were just asking Joy about how she started in the industry and what she was studying, and then how difficult she found that first step to get into it. So as you're here, can I also ask you?
Yeah, sure. Which ties into something I wanted to mention to the point when I dropped out. I used to be a mathematician, so I studied mathematics and then worked in research for a while, military research. Was interesting, and then worked in AI for a couple of years, and then started at CA as a designer. And because earlier Joy mentioned it's really important to be able to sort of use logic to sort of explain and analyze your design, and that's definitely true. But on the other hand, I remember for me very distinctly coming in with a scientific background, I really had to learn that it's not always about logic. Like you can use logic as sort of a guideline, but then in the end, design is a lot about the emotional side and sort of the gut feeling that you have. And you can't just start with, here's an assumption like a thesis, and now I'm going to prove to you why this design rocks, right? It's just, and sort of appealing to the emotional side of whoever you're selling it to, like the other devs or the players in the end. That is really important. And that was sort of my first very distinct lesson that I remember in that sense.
Cool. In terms of sort of, obviously sort of, you've obviously both not studied traditional game design courses, but in terms of sort of, did you know when you went to university that you wanted to be game designers, or did that come to you later on, sort of after your studies?
I knew for a long time that I wanted to work in games, but so this was a long time ago. It wasn't. there wasn't a lot of courses available to me, and also it's changed a lot throughout the years, and there are now a lot of different roles that wasn't there when I started.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, we do spend a lot of time educating people on what actually are the roles within game studios, and on the face of it, we're not a helpful industry, because we certainly do say things like, "Hey, this is a design role." In certain studios, that means you might be doing artwork. Historically, however, more traditionally nowadays, that means you will not be doing it. Design is purely design. You don't have to be an artist. You also don't have to be a programmer. It helps if you're a technical designer. I know that you do know some of those elements, but I think that's where the education side of it is definitely something that hopefully is being improved to help people identify that within them. So in terms of your sort of choice, Leif, did you know you wanted to work in the games industry as a designer, or was that something that came to you sort of further on?
No, it was because I'm a little bit of an older model, and I still come from a background where games were bad, and having a career in games seemed like absolutely unfathomable for a while.
Don't get me wrong. My family did not support this. It was my passion, and I just went for it.
At least you went with computer science. Something solid.
So, and I think we try and get this. There's a lot of there's a question here which I think is interesting, which says, is it the choice of university, is it important to study game design? And I think that from my perspective, what we try and sort of get across is that we pay attention to what you study, but that's not what we pay attention to for when we're hiring. It's actually the skills you bring with you. So what we employ are skills, not necessarily a qualification, because a qualification doesn't inform us of what skills you actually have. And so we want you to sort of get that across. So I'm going to ask something now, which we get asked all the time, which I'm hoping you might have a fairly succinct answer to. It may be that you both differ in this opinion, but when someone applies, is it important for you to see any of their design documentation behind what they do?
I think it's important that it's not important to have a game design degree. But I think it's important that you've played a lot of games, maybe analyzed a few games, maybe made some mods for games that have that, or maybe created your own project in Unreal or Unity, or any other game that lets you create a level, like Dreams or Mario Maker. And if you have that to show, that could, be enough.
Yeah. From your perspective, is it good for people to have good design documentation to show you?
I definitely agree with Joy that it's not about the game dev degree of any form. I think what we are looking for is sort of a specific intellect to work in the space of games, if you will. And that like you said, like we look for skills, not finished projects, and in that sense, a game design degree often helps a bit because, there's
should arm you with most of the skills that you need.
Exactly. But if you can get these skills, and if you have these skills just from playing a lot and thinking about games a lot and talking a lot about games, exchanging thoughts with other people, that might give you the same skills, and you might have a set of background skills that you don't learn in a game dev degree. Like if you study psychology or if you study marketing, that's all really relevant things in game design.
So do you think from that perspective then, like, would it help if does it need to be just game? Can they have designed a board game, a card game? Could they show you that, and that would impress you just as much as other projects?
Board games is actually really good because they have a set of rules, right? And that you have to try and teach the player in a different way. It's not interactive, basically. So yes, I would be very interested to see people designing their own board games.
And for me, I remember one of the sort of most significant books I ever read in the latest years was the book about advertising and marketing, because I think a lot of and I'm sure most of you out there have seen Mad Men, and some of the thought process that these folks are going through in the show is very similar to games, because we're making an experience. And if you're making an experience as a billboard advertisement or as a game feature, it's very similar in the sense that it's about delivering that experience, be it through mechanics or just visual language. And so in that sense, it can add a lot of interesting things to the mix. It's really good.
Cool. In terms of if you are an aspiring designer, when you were in that position, and you know you want to make that way into the world, what is a piece of advice you'd give to someone that is trying to get there, that wants to do it? What would be a key piece of advice you'd say to them now to help them on that journey?
Well, I think one good advice, solid advice, is definitely start making games. Be it a board game, like Joy said, be it prototyping in, I don't know, Unity or Unreal, modding, just because it is on that journey of starting to think about games. It is the most important sort of training ground, you could say. So that would be, if I would only be able to give one tip, it would be that. Okay. And play a lot of games as well. Yeah. I think that is very important in a variety of games. Like, if you're just playing one genre, definitely would be a good idea to widen a bit and to start thinking. And we had this discussion earlier about F1 2020. Like, even like there's a lot to learn for any genre from other genres.
Another thing that anyone could do is go to game jams.
Yeah.
That gives you a bit of experience of how it is to make a game. You get to work with other people, but you might also come out with a finished product that
I think as well, that's certainly something we do promote as well. And I think it's from the perception of you have a certain time limit, meaning that you could come up with the most fantastic idea ever. However, to deliver the game in 24 hours or 48 hours, there's certain things you're going to need to change about that to make it an end product. And the
themes.
Yeah,
I think that's always very strong about game jams, that you, I don't know, usually given 2 words or a theme, and then you make your game around these things, and you really start to think, okay, how can we make this game about romance? And it says the 2 words are, I don't know, racing and romance, and you're like, all right. You know, so I think that really gets the juices flowing in the right.
And the end product is not the most important thing in a game jam either. I think it's the experience of just going through it with other people.
Do you think then as well that sort of gives you the same skill set, which we often talk about when we do these talks as well, which is the ability to be able to influence and bring people on that journey with you in the team to work towards a shared goal? Does that do you think that's sort of sometimes as important as well as the other aspects as well?
Yeah, no, and like Joy said, so the communication aspect of working in a team and making decisions, you know, in an environment where you take the different opinions on board and you together decide basically on the most productive way forward. I think that's a very good lesson, and it probably also helps with this whole detachment. You know, because you might have this idea to exactly do that, but then everyone else in the group is like, hang on, it doesn't work because of this or that. Oh, okay, I didn't think about that, of course. And, you know, so it's
so if I could counter that then, Leif, for you, is there certain designers where their skills at being able to influence people and convince people means that actually sometimes they're able to get things pushed through that maybe other people wouldn't have, and that is a huge strength sometimes, the ability to sort of convey that with that passion and enthusiasm that these are things we should pursue?
Well, I think it comes down to communication, actually. So if you're able to communicate your idea in a way that other people can envision it the same way you have, then it's going to make it, I guess, it will be an advantage for you to actually get that into the game.
But just also to, maybe as a little counterpoint to that, that yes, that is important. But on the other hand, it is also really important to see things through in the the actual thick of it, and when it gets to the meat. So, I could definitely think about, you could imagine examples where someone is really good at selling the idea on a high level.
Yeah.
Like elevator pitch, bam, like really convincing, and everyone's like, yeah. But then, when it's about, seeing it through, then the problems start to emerge, and this little detail was not thought about, and this was, and they didn't loop in this department, so now the estimates go up. So just to give a little counterpoint, so communication is really important, selling your idea really important, but also being able to back it up with fundamental knowledge and to be able to see it.
Certainly. I think as well, it's good for me to say as well that we I used to joke that when I worked in engineering that we call people finishers, so the people whose pride is taken from the completing and finishing of tasks, and how valuable they are, because in most of the world when you work in a creative environment, everyone wants to have the ideas, but the people who then want to actually take the pride in finishing those might be not as many in number, but they are super important, because it's those people you need to see these things through to get these things over the line.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point about the idea guy. You know, the basically, the execution and being able to see it through. And with that comes a lot of hurdles in practice. You know, oh yes, of course, the UI department, they were bringing up, I don't know, font restrictions. I didn't think about that. And all these kind of things. And that's where, like, really, with every little step, like being able to go through the hurdle and solve this problem and the next one and the next one. That's really important.
Cool. So we've got a question here, which is from Trainee or Morod, and it says, next year I'll be graduating from Oxford Brookes University. So congratulations for doing that. And the degree is in fine art. So they say, do I still have a chance to apply for a trainee designer job? And I would say straight away the answer is yes. But and hopefully if you listen to the Leif and to Joy with their things, what we'd need you to do though is demonstrate to us in an application that you're not applying to be an artist. So in other words, if you send us your art portfolio that you've put together at university, unfortunately that wouldn't impress any of our designers, and the reaction would be that
and really, please, like when people especially sort of come in from a tangent, like if then these people are not putting in a cover letter, it's just, I mean, what am I supposed to do basically? Like definitely, like if people have a different background, then definitely a convincing, strong cover letter can sort of give the incentive to then look further.
Yeah, certainly. In terms of yourself, Joy, so there's a question here which is, have you got any tips for interviews? So have you got any tips yourself for when, because you obviously struggled, you said at the beginning with interviews, so have you got any tips?
I wish I got some tips before I went on my interviews. So it's you should be yourself. Interviews is basically like a way to check if the chemistry will work within the team. It's not just to check your skills, because that's already been proven in the CV, or some companies have design tests. So if you pass the test and you come in for an interview, then it's basically about you and what you're like, and how you think maybe. So it's very important to get that through.
Do you think then from previous interviews then, do you think sort of being able to be relaxed in that scenario, to be able to sort of talk more freely is something that it would be hugely beneficial to have known beforehand?
Yes, I think so. I mean, it's also up to the interviewer to try and make the candidate feel a little bit more relaxed, which I know it's a nerve-wracking situation. I am always nervous at interviews. But I think just having a casual conversation will make the nerves go away, and it will be easier to get to know each other.
Yeah, and I know we've done previous design talks before where we've spoken about the benefits of some people that have started where they've taken jobs that might be in customer service or sales while they're studying and things like this, and the ability to hold conversations that you are maybe alien to yourself at the beginning is certainly something that is beneficial. And I'd always also advise that you've got family members around you. If you feel nervous at interviews, if you're a person who gets anxious or stressed, go through with your parents or family members an interview type scenario, because nothing will seem more alien than having a parent asking you questions they would never normally ask you. But also the fact that they won't understand the answers you're giving. If you give them the questions to read to you that you'd imagine from a design interview, they won't know whether the answer is good or not. So being able to explain so they understand, I think, is also a really useful tip for developing that communication.
Yeah, and even just standing in front of the mirror and speaking, like saying things out loud, definitely helps to sort of, because that's often like the immediate awkwardness of speaking out loud. But I want to add one thing to the interviews in that, and it's like Joy said, it's not necessarily probing the skills as in having the right answers. But again, like we said earlier, being able to discuss and ask the right questions is super valuable. So it's less about checking, do they, say the right thing, but more how do they think?
Yeah.
And
how do they problem solve?
Exactly. Yeah. And so in that sense, it's very similar to university exams, where often the professor also wants to see, good, they weren't prepared for that question. Now see how they, go
yes.
through it. And it's very similar in an interview. And it's not, that's why I think Joy has a point that one should try to be themselves, because it's basically, it loosens up the nerves and the muscles and the brain, basically. But you know what I mean? Like to be flexible and be open, and not be like, it's fine.
So they shouldn't be afraid of asking questions either.
Yes. Yeah.
Because they need to have a good understanding of what the role is as well. And if they don't, then they can ask questions.
I think as well, it's certainly trying to get across to hopefully all of you listening that questions doesn't show a sign of weakness. It shows actually a sign of strength. Yeah. And actually the desire to want to understand is really, really useful to us. But Joy, an interesting question is, because I'm guessing, did you start as a trainee initially? Or a junior member of the team?
Not at CA, no.
Not at CA, but when you did, obviously, in the games industry, what input would a trainee designer have? And Leif, that might be important from from the trainee designers that are in your teams. What input do they have in the process?
So,
go.
You go.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think a lot of the times it's in a way, about continuing that journey to the things, like all the things we discussed now, are things that every designer should strive towards to. But most of us aren't quite there yet. We have all our weaknesses, and and even if it's something almost like trivial as not being able to write a good documentation, I mean, that is unfortunately also important. So there's like being a designer, starting from trainee and then climbing up the ranks, so to speak, is a long, long journey. And it's also important to acknowledge that, there is a lot to learn, and let's sort of take it bite-sized chunk-wise and not acknowledge that it's going to be a long journey, and basically be patient with yourself as you progress. And then, but more practically speaking, I think for trainees, I guess the biggest lesson is always the environment that we're working in. Basically, the different disciplines and in big teams, being able to see all the different aspects of game development, all the different aspects of designing things, where catering for different player types and all the sort of the complexity that's a bit higher than when you just do your little game, for example, your project where you have a clear vision and you go for it. Mainly the environment, I think, big one.
And Joy, when you first started, then were you initially unleashed on features? Were you having to build up to that? How does that work for you?
At CA.
Yeah.
I was unleashed on features. It was, you just started? Okay, here's some time, play the game, and now here's a bunch of features we want you to do or come up with. Okay, all right. So you start with ideas, you talk to the other people and be like, what do you think? Will this fit in the game? Or maybe if we change it to this, and so on.
Yeah, because that's definitely the best way to learn, is not to sit in the corner and do some practice designs. Is to be unleashed on the.
Exactly, because you get to use the tools straight away, and so you will learn how to use them. You will be forced, I guess, to speak to your team members as well, which is very important. And you get to know the game.
I think the next question is, I'll sort of start initially, but I'll hand over to you guys then as well, because you guys get to see these CVs and cover letters. But it says, any hints for the application on CV and cover letter? And I always give a first tip, which I give to everybody, which is we try and be as transparent as we can about the skills that we're looking for. So to do that, in our job descriptions, we put bullet points of skills and experience that we're looking for. They're an indication to you to hopefully see the criteria you need to meet to want to get an interview. So what I do, which is super boring, is I go through and I tick off whether my CV shows all of these points. And any that aren't or are ambiguous, I will make sure I cover them in a cover letter so that whoever is reading that is left with no ambiguity about whether or not they think I should be suitable for that position. It's quite boring, it's quite methodical, but I have a job, so fingers crossed it works most of the time. And I've been quite lucky in getting jobs, but I think it's fundamental when, you know, a CV can be something you go, yep, I've studied here, I've done this, I've got some interest, send. It's the job boards make it super easy to just click and send 100 applications. And I guarantee you, you send 100 applications, you might get 1 or 2 replies. If you spend that 20, 30 minutes on each application, looking through, reading the job description, evidencing how you meet the criteria they're looking for, you will find yourself far more in a better place than you did, you know, previously. But from your perspective then, Leif, when you're looking at someone's CV and cover letter, what hints do you think, what stands out to you in that?
Yeah, first of all, I mean, excellent points, Luke.
Yeah.
You're, of course, the recruitment expert, no wonder. Just to add one thing that I believe, like I personally, for example, I have never ever sent the same CV to the next, like twice, basically. Yeah. Like even a CV that's quite sort of, you know, objective, neutral facts in there. Even the CV, I think there's always room to tailor it to match the bullet points you were mentioning. Basically, make it get like what is relevant for this role in particular. And similar for the cover letter, I think to really, you know, it's just sort of. When I heard these advice, I was always bored. But you know, why should we hire you? Right? Like, I mean, just to get this ambition and I mean, for me personally, I'm not sure about you, Joy, what your life experience is, but for me, when I wasn't really that excited about a job, just sort of send it off, like then usually the response wasn't as good. Whereas if you really want it and you really believe you have good reasons why you should be the one, then put it in the cover letter. That's.
Do you know, I'd also add as well, this is going to sound funny, but if you want to be a designer, you've designed your CV, you've sent it in. Yeah, if it doesn't get across to us what we need to know, that isn't a good indication. If you've taken shortcuts and done a quick version, that's, you know, we don't look for a designer that can do it the quickest. We want someone that sees it through, that completes it. And I think that's certainly a really important thing, is that when you look at that CV, and I don't mean, by the way, the CVs where they're an image that moves and you've got all these everything fancy going on, right? Because that can actually be sometimes quite a distraction to getting the information we need. Something that when we look at it, everything's clear, it's laid out logically, it's easy to understand and follow, because you know, these guys, Joy and Leif, when they're looking at your CVs, they don't have hours and hours and hours to pour through your application. We might get hundreds and we need to find out who is the best. So, and who are the people that we need to move through. Now, yes, you'll get a test to do that, but I think the fundamental thing is have a look at your CV. If you gave it to your dad, your mum, your brother, your friend, and said, what do you think that tells you I want to be? If they don't come back with that job, you know, the job that you're applying for, maybe have a look at it, maybe then educate them as to why, show them the job description, get them to almost do the layman's terms of ticking off whether they think you meet those criteria. And if there's lots of question marks at the end, I'd say, you know, refine that and make sure that there's less of that ambiguity left in your application.
But also, again, as a little counterpoint, there's always a bit of a discussion around meeting requirements.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of studies about, you know, certain people worrying too much about meeting all the requirements. And I remember when I applied to CA, there was something in there about 1,000 hours of something, and I remember trying desperately to finish that one legendary campaign because I'm worried that CA would check if I had the legendary achievement. That's not. So these requirements, they are of course important, but it doesn't mean that it always has, like, you don't have to tick all the boxes. If there's a, but then I think it's worth highlighting, like, okay, if you don't have any actual experience with games, then that needs to be addressed in the cover letter. The cover letter is also a space where you can sort of work around your weaknesses.
And I think getting across your passion and enthusiasm is also not a negative. It needs to be backed up with how that can be turned into positive things. Because if you just apply and said, "Look, I love Total War," for example, I've played this many hours of X game, and therefore you should hire me. The passion and enthusiasm is great, but you've not answered what that skills that's given you. So if it was me, I would say I've played this many hours and I found that I enjoyed playing this certain style or in this way, and I wondered what decisions were made here. And if your cover letter explains all of the thought processes you go in and around that, it would help us give an understanding of why you'd want to work with us, but also what your skills may lie within. And that is a big part of getting across that. I'll go to another question quickly before we quickly go into more of the same.
That's one interesting one here. Look, the 3 traits.
Yes. So I was going to go that next. So what would be what would be your top 3 traits that you think would guarantee a junior designer being hired?
Guaranteed.
So there's no guarantee. Because, like Joy also said earlier, like it is a bit about the chemistry and the team fit, so it's, there's no guarantee, but 3 strong traits that I think should be part of a good designer's intellect is the ability to reflect, basically have a means to reflect on your own designs, other people's designs, see different viewpoints, don't take it, like, appreciate that opinions don't matter. Like, there are a lot of opinions out there, and you need to understand all of them. Secondly, abstraction. So sometimes interesting to ask people in interviews, for example, about our culture and religion system. And that for some people, it seems like we built different systems around religion and then culture and then chaos, corruption, Warhammer. And the understanding that this is the same system. It's just dressed differently, and it does exactly the same thing for the game. That is quite important to learn, basically, just zooming in and zooming out, what I mentioned. And then lastly, touched upon that, the whole communication. And just generally don't be, I don't want to use any swear words here, but
don't be argumentative. Don't be constructive.
Be constructive and do whatever you can to learn to be constructive in discussions. And
I was gonna say communication. Definitely, you need be able to communicate, get your thoughts across, your opinions across, be able to take criticism as well. So as you are doing this, as you're communicating, make sure, be able to take other people's opinions in as well, and also be able to analyze, be logical, because that's needed for everything when being a designer.
I certainly always say, which is we do try and do, which is interviews are stressful situations. You can bring notes, you can bring things you've prepared in to make sure you cover them in a discussion. But I would say that the biggest tip I would always give you is to listen. And I mean that in the most genuine way. I am a waffler. I can talk for quite a lot. And in actual fact, the ability to just sit there and calm yourself, to listen to the question that's being asked. And then you don't have to jump into a reply. We're not looking for the speed of response. And take time to think about how you want to compose this, because the ability to be succinct, the ability to actually end up, because I guarantee you, a lot of these guys will sit in interviews where they will ask a question and the question is never actually answered. It's gone on to a different question entirely. And when they think back, they go, they didn't answer this. The ability to actually answer the question that's asked is also really fundamental, because it gets across the ability to be able to do that. And I think that's a key trait. Make sure you listen and actively listen, and make sure you take that in before giving your answers is a key thing I'd definitely say. Cool. Next question is, any tips, which I think is useful, any tips for a portfolio? What would you like to see from a junior designer in a portfolio? Would you like to see a website, for example? Would you like to, is there anything that you'd say to avoid? Is there anything you're saying they should definitely have?
So I think it can be something as simple as a paper design of something that they've made. Maybe a level, maybe a system that they've created, maybe a board game that was made by, just cut up paper pieces here and there. So it doesn't even have to be something extravagant, but it could also be, a link to, I don't know, a Unity project that they made, or
or a link to a YouTube video of all the game jams they participated in, or whatever it is.
Or tell us about maybe a mod that they made.
Cool. And for you, Leif, is there anything that stands out for you?
Yeah, two things. One is, maybe a bit annoying, but accessibility of information is important. Like whenever it can be done, I don't know, in a couple of slides or with a quick 1-minute video, that's definitely better than having a 13-page documentation about a specific feature idea. I mean, it's cool if it's there, if it's also summarized in a few bullet points at the top. And then again, like with the interviews, like thought process. Like I wouldn't worry too much about the end result. I want to understand the thought process that went into it, because that's really the interesting bit, basically.
In terms of sort of the next question I'll go with, which is does a game designer, which I think we get into, which is does a game designer need to be really adept at programming, or only know the basics of it, which they believe to be the case? So, Chandra, I think that's a great question. And I think it depends what type of design you go into, and these guys will now explain that to you in a bit more detail. But Joy, in terms of your perception, do you think being really adept at programming helps, or do you just need to know some basics?
Well, there are a lot of different designers. We have what should I call it? Every kind of ability on the programming skill scale. We have designers that don't know any programming at all, and then we have designers that have maybe been programmers themselves before. So it depends on what kind of designer you want to be, basically. So if you want to be a technical designer, having some programming skills would definitely be useful. Or if you want to be a scripter, or something like that requires you to write some code. But then we also have like narrative designers that don't write any code at all. Level designers, depending on what kind of engine you're using, you might not need to know any kind of scripting. So
designers are the hub between all disciplines, right? And understanding and being able to read code helps, just as it helps to understand basics of UI design and artistic questions and color compositions and the goldener Schnitt. I don't know the English word. The composition within the frame.
The golden rule.
The golden rule, yeah. So being able to speak the languages of other disciplines is very valuable. There are some hardliners who believe that every designer should aspire to have a broad 360 knowledge of everything, and that's definitely very good if you understand the languages of all the departments. But like Joy said, like especially early on in your career, you can definitely find your spot basically, and whatever suits you and where you have a natural ability and basically specialize on this first.
Yeah, I think it's good to also add there quickly for you all, which is our design departments aren't just 1 or 2 or 3 people. They're quite large, meaning that when we hire designers in, if you specialize in something, if you have a specific skill which is more towards coding or towards the art and layout or level design, we will utilize the skills you have to their maximum effect. Now, if it just so happens that the flavor of designer we're looking for isn't what you are, that doesn't mean you're not good enough to be a designer. A no isn't necessarily a no. It might be that actually what's more useful to us and the project at the time is somebody who is more technical or is more systems focused or is more level focused, and you coming back and trying again, but asking those questions in terms of what sort of designer would work best in your team's example is great interview questions to ask, because they'll be able to give you those honest answers as well. Next question then is which is, how do you guys or how does the use of exploits or unintended strategies affect difficulty balance? This is quite a technical question here. If a lot of people are using exploits to skip, avoid, or easily win part of the game, does that mean the part is too difficult? That is a real design question there for you guys, which is probably quite complex.
Well, I think it's an interesting one, because I think a lot of it comes from player agency, and that we always strive to allow our players to play the game how they want to play it.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily bad if players find creative ways to maybe not deal with a certain aspect of the game that they are not enjoying.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we certainly do try to avoid situations where an exploit is so clear that you basically invalidate a lot of other parts of the game because you can just do that and then it's never a problem. So we definitely think about these a lot in terms of the balancing of the game. I did talk about that actually quite a bit on some live stream before, I think.
You've got a difficult balance, haven't you, Life? Of it's difficult enough so that you get a reward from doing it, but it's not too difficult that means you turn it off and throw your PC out the window and never want to play a game again.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, hopefully I'm sure there's other live streams as well. We can go into that in a bit more detail. It is a detailed question there, or playlist. So thank you, but it's going to be we'll hopefully try and cover those at different times. So this is a question which I think you two might be quite keen on answering, which is how hard or easy do you think it is designing a strategy game compared to other genre of games?
I think all genres have their own challenges. So I'm not sure if I can say that it's easier or harder, but it might be easier to design sequels of a game than it would be to design a game from scratch. Because you have something to work from, right?
But all the baggage that comes with it.
Yeah, that is true. But you've learned all the workarounds.
Yeah.
Do you think if you are so I'm going to propose this slightly differently, which hopefully might help a few people, which is if you were going to design a game to show someone, to demonstrate for a university project, etc., do you think there's certain things which would show you working examples quicker in certain genres? Like, is it easier to quickly show a level for a strategy game compared to a first-person shooter, compared to a platform? Like, do you think there's differences there?
I have a very strong opinion about this, in the sense that because there's often the argument that a vertical slice is very difficult to do in a strategy game compared to other genres, and to some extent it's true because strategy game, of course, you have all the systems need to be in place, and then you basically have the game.
Yeah.
And only then you have the game that you can demonstrate. But I believe even in a complex game like this, you should be able to maybe abstract some systems out, or have an abstract representation of it, and if everything else falls apart, you make a PowerPoint slide presentation that presents you sequences of turns through the game. So I think you can always strive for having that vertical slice or the a selling point for your game in any genre.
Yeah.
But it's requires a bit more workarounds in strategy games.
Cool. And I think as well, I'd like to add that a few of the portfolios I've seen that have certainly stood out over the years are where, so we've had somebody do a particularly good level design piece, and they've showed us that, and they've said, look, this could be used for a first-person shooter, but equally, this is why I've done this research. And actually, they've done heat maps showing player routes through. They've shown where engagements happened. They'd created this level. And then they said, however, I decided to see if it worked in a strategy mode. And they then changed their design to see how that affected and changed it. And it posed, for the designers that they showed, it posed a massive questions. And it's sort of the level of interest created around that is something that probably in an interview scenario would have swallowed up more than the interview could have taken. But I think it was the amount of research and effort and the iterations of that and the questions proposed is sort of what a design process goes through for you guys as well, I'm imagining.
The use of data in this example, I think, is really good. Like, to be mindful of acquiring the data required. Joy, I think you're in that space quite a bit as well, right? To basically, think about how can I actually measure things and get some hard facts around it, basically.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we've got one last question for you both, because unfortunately we need to sort of wrap this up for everyone and then let them get back to their day. So I'll start with you, Joy. What is the favourite feature you've created?
Oh, wow. Created quite a few features by now. But I think the one I had most fun with, and the one that I really enjoyed, is the Choose Your Own Adventure feature for Thrones of Britannia. So the Viking factions, or they had these events with 4 options, and you basically got to choose where you would go. So it was called expeditions, and it was you setting sail out of the UK basically to try and find some traded goods. So you got options of where you wanted to go, and depending on what you chose, you would end up in different places, and you could get ambushed and stuff on the way. So yeah, I had a lot of fun doing that one.
And for you, Leif, same question. So what's the favourite feature you've created?
It's a very difficult one. I think overall, the overall economy in Three Kingdoms, I think, is probably one I most fond memories of. I know it has some problems here and there, but overall, I think I quite enjoy how it plays, basically.
Cool. So thanks for everyone for joining us. And unfortunately, that's all we've got time for now. Obviously, we appreciate all your questions, and feel free to, if you want to keep sending through those questions, we do keep them. We do try and get back to as many people as we can. Obviously, we are all quite busy, but we do try and get back to as much as we can. We have more live streams that go on, and there are future events. If you keep an eye on our media channels, etc., you will see when we're doing more Q&As, when we're doing more talks, when we're going out to events, when they're allowed to happen again, and when we have video events and things like this. So yeah, I guess thanks everyone for joining us, and have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.